Hi there, I'm Scott Walker, and it's great to be speaking with you today. For the last best part of 20 years, I've worked as a kidnap-for-ransom and hostage negotiator. And what does that mean? Well, I had a ringside seat into what makes people tick, how they think and feel and act, particularly in times of stress, challenge, uncertainty, conflict, a bit like the time we're living in right now, you could say. And you may be thinking, well, this is all very well and good, Scott, but actually, what has that got to do with me and my day-to-day job? Well, when you think about it, a negotiation is simply a conversation with a purpose. And it doesn't matter if I was trying to negotiate the release of hostages or get ransom money, as you see here on the screen, from one country to the next, or you're dealing with a client, colleague, your kids. The same principles, the same tools and techniques apply. And that is what I'm going to share with you today about how are we going to do that. And ultimately, think about it as if you're negotiating every single day, even if you don't think you are, because after all, you are looking to influence and persuade and bring about some kind of cooperation and collaboration. Correct me if I'm wrong there. And so one way of looking at that is I'm just going to share with you a a slide now. Let me just move on. So there's a process we use in the hostage and kidnap negotiation world. And I'm going to share with you this process and I'm going to give you some stories as to how this is being used in reality and how you can also use it. Okay, so right at the outset, there's a framework. If you want to bring about some kind of influence or persuasion, you need to follow these 6 steps. All right. And they start off on the one end here, the mindset and emotions. All right. Then it's about, okay, well, how can you prepare before every call? Being able to use your Jedi mind tricks and get into their head and understand their world about what makes them tick. And then you're able to engage with empathy, you build that rapport and trust, and then you achieve the influence. So just wanted to give you a framework here with which we're going to cover now. And I'm usually asked, actually, the question I'm usually asked the most is, okay, Scott, well, how did you get into this really? It's probably a good place to start, and it actually lays the foundation to the framework I've just shared with you. And my very first case, I was a police officer at Scotland Yard, and I got promoted a few levels at this point. But the only dangerous thing I was going to face, or the most interesting thing I was going to face, was trying to avoid paper cuts for all of the crime reports I had to supervise. And so one day I go into the canteen at Greenwich Police Station and I bump into a colleague, a friend of mine, and we're just chatting. And I'm explaining to him how bored I am. There's nothing really going on in my world. But then he elaborates on the last 4 or 5 days he's spent looking to negotiate the release of a hostage. And I'm enthralled and I want some of this. And so he puts me in touch with a unit that covers this at Scotland Yard. And then for about 5 years or so, I spent my time actually taking the phone call, racing across London, and then sitting with the family or the company, and then working out what were we going to say in order to get the loved one or the colleague back from the kidnappers. And then after a few years of doing that, I then left the police and went into the corporate sector where it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, which meant getting the phone call, flying out somewhere, and staying on the ground, working with the family, with the company to get the people back. And I remember my very first case, I was really super excited, really enthusiastic. And I get the phone call at 2 o'clock in the morning. And it's always at 2 o'clock in the morning. It was never, Wednesday lunchtime. I had nothing on my desk and I was ready for a case. That never happened. And so I get the call, put the blue light on the top of the car, and I race across to the other side of London. And I get to this tiny apartment where there's a family of 9 living there, and in not particularly great conditions either. And so my job, as I alluded to, was to sit with the family, reassure them, come up with a strategy about what we're going to say to the kidnappers in order to secure the release of their youngest son, who had been taken 24 hours before by a drugs gang in the area. And unfortunately, they were sending through effectively torture videos. And so this was really traumatic, as you can imagine, for the parents and the siblings. The emotions are high. And so I rock up full of vim and vigor and enthusiasm, and I'm there to give them advice. I'm there to try and persuade them to listen to what I'm saying, to then follow through with what they need to do. But as a couple of days go by and we're not really making the progress we need to, and after a couple of days in, I end up turning round to the family, these poor parents whose son had been taken. And I turn around to them, having allowed my frustrations and anger and disappointment and ego to get in the way. I turned round and effectively said words to the effect of, "What is it about what I'm telling you that you don't understand? If only you could listen to what I'm telling you would get your loved one back. Why can't you understand that?" And you can imagine how that went down. And these poor parents are like looking at me as if, what are you saying? And I nearly had the shortest career in hostage negotiation. That is until the more experienced colleague who I was with on that case, I'll call him Yoda, although his name was Steve. And he put his hand on my shoulder and he just squeezed it ever so slightly. But that was enough in order to interrupt my pattern and to stop me from spiraling into a further negative loop mentally. And I took a step back and I watched a masterclass in what to say and do in those situations. And then over the course of the next few days, we managed to navigate quite a few challenges, one of which were the kidnappers turned round to the family on one of the calls and said, "We know where you live." And they gave the address and they said, "We're going to come and spray the place with a Mac 10 machine gun." Now, I don't know about you, but I don't particularly want to be in the vicinity of that when that goes off. So I guess the purpose of the story is, and we got the brother back, we got the youngest son back, by the way. But the point of the story is the importance of managing what is essentially the number one skill of all the world's best negotiators. And remember, you're negotiating every single day, even if you don't realizing it. And that skill to master is emotional self-regulation. Imagine I'm there in a room and I allow my own emotions to get the better of me. That's not going to end well. Just like it's not going to end well for you if you allow fear, greed, disappointment, frustration. You're looking to name, blame, and shame others in a situation. Well, not you're trying to close a deal in sales, or you're trying to persuade a colleague or family member to do something. And one of the best ways to perhaps remember this, it's something that Steve Yoda taught me afterwards, was this concept of observing but not absorbing. And so when I watched him, he was able to effectively observe what was going on, but not allow himself to be absorbed by all those powerful emotions. And a way to imagine this, okay, it doesn't matter what context you're dealing with here. Imagine you're stood on the riverbank and in front of you, there's a swirling river going in front of you. And sometimes that river is like a nice, gentle stream. But there's other times where it's flowing like it's a white water rapids. And then occasionally, what happens is you get that little nudge. Life nudges you in the back and you fall in the river. But that's okay, it's part of life, right? You dust yourself off, you get out, you dry yourself, and then you carry on. But what happens for most of us from time to time, and happened in that first case I was involved in, is not, yes, you don't get out. What you do is you go for a swim and you get carried off downstream, out into sea, out into the ocean, and you start drowning in the waves of overwhelm. And so if you only take one thing away from today, it's that being able to regulate your emotions. It's being able to observe but not absorb and stay on that riverbank. And if you fall in, that's fine. Just don't dwell there. Don't linger in the pity party. And from that place on the riverbank, you're able to bring far more sense of groundedness and calm and objectivity, even though as human beings, we are emotional creatures. We're feeling creatures that think, not thinking creatures that feel. And again, another thing I learned the hard way over best part of 20 years and 300 cases, and it didn't matter where I was in the world, which industry or sector, where the geography was, the culture, the language, whatever. Some of these themes and patterns showed up every time as to who not only survived, but came out of these difficult life or death scenarios, actually having a better life as a result. And these were people who they were able to manage what we call wise optimism. Now, there's a balance at one end of the spectrum where there's this naive positivity, unicorns and rainbows. And at the other end, there's catastrophizing and doom and gloom. But here's the thing. And from debriefing hundreds of hostages, the ones, as I said, who got through it well, were able to choose what they focused on and then the meaning they gave it. They were able to focus on the things they could control, not the things they didn't, and they allowed all of that noise to just then pass them by. And so this concept of wise optimism, which they all did, even without knowing what it was, well, they were able to accept the position they were in. They accepted it, they acknowledged it, but fundamentally they realized they had some agency about what to do and how to respond accordingly, rather than being a victim, rather than taking on that victim mindset. And I remember in another case, we got a phone call. I was in the police at the time. And again, it always seems to be the brothers who get in touch with the police. And this guy's younger brother being taken by, again, a rival gang. And I pick up the brother who's phoning the police, get him in the back of the police car, and we go to a hotel in central London, get into a suite there. And he walks in the room, into the hotel room, and the brother turns around and went, "Is this it?" I'm like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, where's all the monitors and the satellite feeds and the helicopter gunships, and how are we going to get my brother back?" And I'm like, "No, you're missing the point here. That's not how this works. What we're going to do is we're going to tape recorder, got a pen and paper here, and we're going to do this. We're going to use these to get your brother back. We're going to listen. We're going to manage our own emotions. We're going to focus on what we can control. We're going to bring some wise optimism. We're going to stay regulated. We're going to observe but not absorb. And we need to kind of stay focused on what's really important about what we have control, the controllables essentially. And then a part of that preparation, which is the next stage, is to do what we call a bunch of fives. So I'm there with a brother in this hotel room. I've managed to placate him. And I went, right, what we need to work through now are imagine like the palm of your hand. I'd say, okay, we need to think of what are the top five objections, threats, issues, problems, demands that the other side are likely to levy against us. Essentially, we want to be devil's advocate. And then we want to be able to come up with a solution or our response to that. And that's no different to when you're on the calls or having the conversations. Think about, okay, if you were them, if you were the other side and you wanted to mess this up or put something in the way, what would that be? And so time spent in preparation is seldom wasted because then what it does, it enables you to enter these difficult conversations with far more certainty and confidence. And there was a case a few years ago. I was thousands of miles away from home in a small windowless room in an embassy compound. And a couple of days before, 6 people had been taken by pirates off a ship, and we hadn't heard from them. So I'm advising the government of this country and the company who owned the ship. And I'm there in the room. I've briefed the team, I've briefed the embassy staff about what is going to happen. All right, so I managed to get my own emotions in gear. And in the center of the table is a phone, a mobile phone, an old Nokia mobile phone. And it hasn't rung. And I'm getting a bit worried though still. But we've done our preparation, we've done our bunch of fives, etc. And in walks this man mountain of a guy who I'll call Mr. John. And I'm using him as a communicator because of the language barrier, potentially with the kidnappers. And he comes in and he towers above me and he's like, Mr. Scott, why do the kidnappers not call? And I say, we must be patient. They will call when they're ready. And then as if by magic, what happens is the phone rings and everybody jumps and I jump, even though this is, case 300 or whatever it is. Mr. John presses the button. Hello, hello, my friends. We're here. And this booming voice comes out of the phone. We have your people. We want $5 million by the end of the week or they die. And so then the phone hangs up and then everyone looks at me. You can hear a pin drop. And we think, great, game on. This is what it's about. Now we can really negotiate. And so as the next couple of weeks go by, we managed to get them from 5 million down to 500,000. But it's playing havoc with my good friend, Mr. John. He hasn't been able to stay regulated. He's not really focusing on our preparation and the bunch of fives. And he's not been able to necessarily empathize with the bad guys, which is still important, even though we've got nothing in common. And it's starting to unravel. And he turns around on one call to the kidnappers and says, please, you must look after my people, my friends. They're your responsibility. And the kidnappers turned around and went, no, they're yours. The money by the end of the week, or we will kill them. And the line goes dead. And then Mr. John stands up and he's about to smash the table. I'm thinking he's going to turn and face me, and being punched by the client is never a great look. And he walks out. I'm thinking, right, I now need to bring something else that I've learned to the table here, which is there's 3 steps. You've always got to be taking an initiative and a calculated risk. Okay, great. Kidnappers can stay where they are. They're fine. They're businessmen looking for a good deal. I now need to divert my attention to getting Mr. John in the game. So the second step there is about cooperation and collaboration. I need to collaborate and bring him back in. The third point to mention here is it's always about building trust. Trust is the golden thread through any negotiation, which is why there's a 93% chance of success when the kidnappers, or in an industry that's the most unregulated, ungoverned in the world, that's why the kidnappers will release the hostages when we pay some money. But before we get to that, Mr. John comes in, the next day, having sat with me for the best part of a day, where I've managed to regulate him, to get him on that riverbank, to get him out of the river. And then he comes in and we take a call from the kidnappers and we close at 300,000. And then we get the hostages back. All because we've managed to follow a process which I shared with you at the beginning. I know you can see here on your screen. We managed to really to establish strong mindset and emotions. And when they go off track, we can get them back on. We spend our time preparing. And then particularly we Mr. John here, and with the brother in the hotel suite, I was able to understand their world. What was really going on for them? What were their beliefs and values and points of view? And then engage with empathy, build that rapport and trust, and eventually able to achieve the influence. And so these are the steps. Don't rush to problem solve. Don't rush this process. Time spent in these early stages is absolutely key. And so hopefully you found that interesting and informative, and actually you have some practical steps in which you can go away and ultimately have better conversations, which is really what this is all about. Well, thanks for your attention and your patience and engagement with this, and I wish you all the very best.